I am the Ascended Master, Jesus Christ. As a beginning for this release from my heart, I ask you to participate in a meditation. Close your eyes, listen to my voice. Become aware that you are sitting here listening to this. Become aware that you are more than your physical body. And in that awareness, you are mentally stepping outside the body, looking at the body from the outside. Become aware that your body is part of your total energy field. And beyond your physical body is your emotional body. Now you are mentally, through the awareness of the emotional body, stepping outside of the emotional body, experiencing that you are more than the body. Because if you were not more than your emotions, how could you step outside of them? And so now you become aware that beyond your emotional body is your mental body. And in becoming aware of the mental body, you are stepping outside of it, so to speak, looking at it from the outside. Now you are stepping further back and realizing that beyond your mental body is your identity body. And in becoming aware of your identity body, you can also mentally step outside of that and experience that you are more than the identity body. So now your awareness has risen from the physical level to the emotional, to the mental, to the identity level, and beyond the identity level. Well, what in the world of matter, the material world, is beyond the identity? Nothing. No thing. So now you are aware that you are not the physical, you're not the emotional, you're not the mental, you're not the identity. You are no thing. You are not nothing. You are no thing. You are not nothing because you are aware. And this, beyond the identity body, is the nexus between the material world with its 4 levels and the spiritual realm, between your lower being and your I am presence. And this is the seat of the Christ in your being. And when you experience that you are no thing, you are experiencing the conscious you in what we have called pure awareness. You are more than your normal sense of identity, more than your normal experience. You are pure awareness, neutral awareness. When you experience this neutral awareness, what are you experiencing? You are experiencing Christ. What have we explained so many times? What is Christ? It is the mind that was created by the Creator before the Creator created any form, anything. The purpose of Christ is to ensure oneness between the Creator and anything that is created. Anything that has form, any being that has form, meaning self-awareness, an awareness of itself. Now, there are many people for whom it is very difficult to even mentally step outside the physical body, the emotions, the thoughts, and the sense of identity. And the reason for this is that they have not yet experienced that they are more than all of the things in their four lower bodies that they think define them. But even if you cannot, with this exercise, experience the pure awareness of the conscious you, you can still realize that you can see that you have a physical body, an emotional body, a mental body, and an identity body. You can conceive of this. You can study our teachings, and you can come to understand, grasp, internalize the concepts we are giving you. What then is Christ? Is Christ the concepts? Nay. Christ, it's what points to what is beyond the concept, what is more than the concept. So why is the title of this conference The Liberation of Christ? Why does Christ need to be liberated? Well, you may say that we deliberately chose this title because it represents an enigma. Some will call it a contradiction, but it is really an enigma that is meant to make you reach beyond the conceptual mind, what we have also called the linear analytical mind. You see, this is the essential dilemma on a planet like Earth. We have called it an unnatural planet. We have said that an unnatural planet is characterized by a number of things, including that people are in this state of separation that makes them self-centered, self-focused, selfish. We have said that when people go into separation, their minds become closed systems because they think they can define reality from inside their minds. They think they can create mental images in the separate mind and project it upon reality. Now, this is a phenomenon that can only exist on an unnatural planet, as we have explained many times. It doesn't exist on a natural planet. But that is, of course, not very relevant to people's situation on Earth. So let us for a minute consider what it is that happens when a being goes into the state of separation. First of all, we have explained that separation is not real. Separation is not a state that exists. It is an illusion created in the mind. Now, some would dispute this. Some of the fallen beings trapped in a serpentine mind would dispute this and would come up with various arguments against it. However, let us put that aside for now and consider the situation that most people are in here on Earth. How do you create this illusion of separation? How does it come to seem real? What did I say? The Christ mind is meant to ensure oneness between Creator and creation. How does the Christ mind do this? Well, as it says in the Gospel, without him was not anything made that was made. You cannot create anything. You cannot conceptualize anything without the Christ mind. It cannot be done. What gives you self-awareness as an individual being is the Christ mind. That is why I have said before that you are already the Christ. The conscious you is the Christ. When it experiences itself as pure awareness, as neutral awareness. What does this mean? What is neutral awareness, pure awareness? It is an awareness that is beyond concepts. Now there are, as we have explained, levels of the spiritual realm, reaching from your unascended sphere all the way through 6 ascended spheres to the Creator. So there are many levels of the Christ consciousness. You cannot, on an undescended, unnatural planet like Earth, experience the highest levels of the Christ mind. But you do not have to, because you only have to experience that there's something beyond your current level of mind. Because when you have that experience, you know that you can be free from the prison of your current state of mind. You can be liberated from your current state of mind. You can escape suffering caused by your current state of mind. You can attain greater freedom and creativity than your current state of mind. So without him was not anything made that was made, meaning that this identity that the conscious you has created here on Earth, this mental apparatus, this emotional patterns and even this physical body are all created out of the Christ consciousness. Of course, if you will monitor yourself, you will see that right now, as you are hearing these words, your mental mind is racing 100 miles a minute to come up with an explanation that it can grasp, to take what I'm saying and fit it into your worldview, your spiritual view. The mind wants to take what I'm saying and conceptualize it, thereby fitting it into the structure that is already in the mind. But you see, that structure is created out of the Christ mind, but it is not the Christ mind. Allow yourself to absorb this statement. The structure in your mind, in the identity, mental, emotional level, is created out of the Christ mind, but is not the Christ mind. How can you deal with this statement? Consider what I am attempting to do here. I am an ascended master. I am beyond any structure, any concept on earth. Surely many people have a concept about Jesus Christ, who I am, what I am today, what I am not. But I am beyond all of this. Yet, because you are an embodiment, you are on this dense planet, you are trapped in some level of separation, I have to speak to you with words that you can grasp. But how are you grasping the words? With the mind. And what does the mind do with words? Well, it associates the words with concepts. So, when I speak in words, the mind wants to take these words and put them into its structure, fit them into its subconscious database, find some kind of file folder. Ah, yes, these words are associated with that folder. And when I can put the words that this ascended master Jesus is speaking into a folder, I have them under control. I am still in control as long as I can take anything that is said and put it into a file folder. Label it with a concept. Then I am still in control, meaning the conscious you is still looking at the world from inside my perception filter that I have so carefully crafted for the conscious you over so many lifetimes on earth. This is just the nature of what ascended masters have to work with on an unnatural planet. That is why we have given you so many teachings about the duality consciousness, about perception filters, about the ego, about the conscious you being more than all of this. But do you grasp it? Do you experience it? Can you take the teachings and step outside of the structure in the mind and experience that there is something more? Now, you might say, at least for the vast majority of people who have come in contact with this dispensation, that you have experienced it. You have experienced that there is more to you than the mind. Otherwise, you would not be following these teachings. There are always a few exceptions, but for the vast majority of you, you have experienced it in glimpses. And so you simply need to recognize that experience and build on it. You see, what have we said about the conscious you? It creates structures in the 4 levels of the mind. It creates these subconscious selves. And then you can step inside the self, and now you're experiencing the world through the perception filter of the self. But even though the conscious you has created the selves, you have not become the selves. Well, the same is true of the Christ mind. Without him was not anything made that was made. Without the first begotten Son of the Father, the universal Christ mind, no form, no concept can be created. Yet the Christ mind does not become the concept, does not become the form. Now you can say, and this is really the purpose, the higher esoteric spiritual purpose of the Easter story, you can say that Christ is crucified in matter. The cross has 4 points, and the Christ is crucified in these 4 levels of the matter universe. You cannot create without the Christ mind any sense of identity. You cannot create any mental structures. You cannot create any emotions, any reactionary patterns. And you cannot create anything physical, whether the body or whatever you create with the body, without the Christ mind. But the Christ mind never becomes the form that it takes on. It is always more than the form. It is always connected to this entire hierarchy of light, reaching up to the Creator. You cannot go to a level so low that the Christ is not there. This is an illusion that the fallen beings have created, some of them, and they are very determined to uphold it. This is why you see this concept so often talked about by Christians of heaven and hell. And Christians would say that the Christ is not in hell. But did I not descend into hell for 3 days after my death on the cross? What is the symbolism? Well, the symbolism is twofold. I, as an individual expression of the Christ mind, did descend to a certain level of hell in order to attempt to reach certain souls that were stuck there. But the Christ mind, the universal Christ mind, doesn't descend into hell because hell could not be created without the Christ mind. Without him was not anything made that was made. And so, wherever you go, however low you go, you cannot go there without using the Christ mind. But the Christ mind never becomes what you create. So now, let us step back to a higher level. Let us go to the very highest level of the world of form, that very first sphere that ascended. The very highest level of that first sphere. You have 2 beings there. We can call them Alpha and Omega, although there is an Alpha and Omega in every ascended sphere, even in your undescended sphere, in the spiritual realm. Nevertheless, if we go to the very first sphere, we have 2 beings forming a polarity, and they have the absolute highest level of consciousness that you can reach before the Creator consciousness. What created these beings and their sense of identity? What did they use to create their sense of identity? Well, they used the Christ mind. But even though these beings have the highest level of consciousness you could reach before the Creator, did the Christ mind become them? Nay, because even though these beings have the highest level of consciousness in the world of form, the Christ mind is still more. Why? Because a being, even a being with the highest level of consciousness, has an individual sense of identity. Now, this will seem contradictory to someone on Earth, because if you could experience the consciousness of Alpha and Omega, you would see that you can barely call it individual as you call it individual on Earth, because it is so much more universal. It encompasses the entire world of form. But nevertheless, it is an individual sense of identity. But the Christ mind is not individual. It is not individualized. It is universal. Now you could step up and say, how did the Christ mind come into being in your world of form? But that is a topic I will leave aside for now. In your world of form, there is a specific universal Christ mind that the Creator defined before it started creating form. It is universal. However, how was any form created? You have in the Vedic teachings and Hinduism and some modern non-duality teachings this concept of only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion. Because they say that Brahman is the one undifferentiated consciousness, and everything that has form is in the realm of duality, and it is unreal. Well, but this Brahman that they are talking about is the universal Christ consciousness. The question they are not really asking is, how did this universal, undifferentiated consciousness ever become expressed as differentiated forms? No form can be created without differentiation. You consider there is an undifferentiated state of consciousness. Call it the Christ consciousness or Brahman or infinite awareness or whatever you want to call it. There's an undifferentiated consciousness. But you can contemplate this only because you live in a world of differentiation. You exist as an individual differentiated being. So how did that world of form, the differentiated world, come into being, come into existence? Why is it even there? There is a concept in philosophy and science. Why is there anything at all? And even a more specific question, how could the undifferentiated become form? If there's something that is undifferentiated, such as Brahman, how could form come into being? Could the undifferentiated by itself create form? No. The Christ consciousness cannot create anything by itself. Again, this will sound contradictory. But you realize that the Christ consciousness was created, or at least defined, by your Creator. And what is your Creator? It is an individualized being. And as an individualized being, it can create an image in its mind of what it wants to manifest, and then use the Christ consciousness to create that form. So, as we have explained many times, the Creator created the first sphere, created structures in the sphere, then out of its own being and out of the Christ consciousness, created individual beings, differentiated beings, sent them into the first sphere to be co-creators with the Creator. So, these beings in the first sphere were individualized, differentiated beings. But so is the Creator. The Creator is just beyond any of the beings that are out of the Creator's being, but still an individualized being who can hold a vision and who can manifest that vision. So, where does all this esoteric talk lead to? It leads to the fact that no form has ever been created by the Christ consciousness. No form has ever been created without the Christ consciousness. But out of the Creator's being was created individualized beings. And although they are created out of the Creator's consciousness, when they become individualized by being endowed by the Creator, so to speak, begotten by the Creator, then they become able to create forms out of the Christ consciousness, that the Christ consciousness as the universal, undifferentiated consciousness cannot create. Now, you can express this in different ways. You could say that the Christ consciousness has two aspects, a universal and an individual. And the universal cannot create anything. Only the individualized Christ consciousness can create form, but it creates that form out of the universal Christ consciousness, which is why no being that creates form ever becomes the form that it creates, because it is more than the form. Now, I talked about this central sun in the first sphere with the Alpha and Omega that have the highest consciousness. They are individualizations created by the Creator out of the universal Christ consciousness. But they are individualizations. They have an individual sense of identity that they have co-created over a very long period of time from the beginning of the first sphere. It is a very, very complex sense of identity. And you might say, well, could Alpha and Omega forget that they are out of the Christ consciousness? Nay, because they are in the position they're in today because they ascended from the first sphere. And here is the essential difference between an ascended being and an unascended being. An unascended being is out of the Christ consciousness. It has not become the form that it has taken on. You look at Earth, you look at the typical people on Earth who are completely identified with the contents of their four lower bodies. The difference between the average person on Earth and the consciousness of Alpha and Omega is immense, unfathomable for anyone on Earth. But they are still out of the Christ consciousness. And therefore, even the average person on Earth has not become the identity that it has taken on here on Earth. It has the Christ consciousness within it. But the thing is, it has forgotten this. The conscious you has forgotten who it is, or rather, it hasn't actually forgotten. It is just experiencing something different because it experiences the world through the perception filter of these subconscious selves. So it's not that it has become something. It's not even that it has really forgotten. It's just focused on a certain type of experience instead of going beyond, as I had you do in this beginning meditation. So the thing is, in an unascended sphere, as an unascended being, you can create a sense of identity, you can create a structure at the four levels, and you can become so colored by it that you do not experience the Christ behind it. You do not see that behind all of these forms is the Christ, the universal Christ mind, without which not anything that was made was made. But when you ascend by recognizing who you are. And therefore, once you have ascended, you could never again forget, you could never again have that experience that the Christ is not within any form. So Alpha and Omega, they have an extremely complex identity. But they know they are out of the Christ mind. And that without the Christ mind, they could not do anything. Without the Creator, they could not exist. They know this. So even though they have the highest level of awareness in your world of form, they still see themselves as co-creators. And so the only difference between you and Alpha and Omega is that you still have structures in these four lower bodies. And it's not just that you have structures. It's that you are identifying yourself with them so that you are looking at the world through these structures. And now comes the tricky part. It is not that you have to let go of all the structures. It's that you have to let go of the sense of identification with them. The living Christ is not a person in physical embodiment who has absolutely no structures in his or her four lower bodies. Because in order to function in a physical body, through a physical body, in order to do anything through a physical body, you have to have some structures. But there are, of course, two levels of these structures you can have. You can have structures that are created out of the illusion of separation, which is what we can also call the consciousness of Antichrist. It is just one name we can apply. We can also call it the duality consciousness, or the separate selves. And the living Christ has transcended those structures, but still has structures that allows it to express itself in the world through a physical body. Now, you may look at a person who has reached the 144th level of consciousness. As we have said, the conscious you starts as pure awareness, goes to the 144th level, takes on a certain illusion. Then it takes on another illusion to go to the 143rd level and continues like that till it reaches the 48th level. These are not illusions that are in separation, in duality. They are illusions that make it seem like Earth is a real world. You have a real physical body, a real emotional body, a real mental body, a real identity body. And that these structures are real. So you take on these illusions to go to the 48th level. Then you can choose to go below the 48th level, go into duality, and now you use the duality consciousness to create other illusions. So as the living Christ, you overcome the dualistic illusions, the separate illusions. And this is what you are meant to do at the 96th level, where you realize that you are more than all of these structures you have in your four lower bodies. You are not, you realize that you have created them, the conscious you has created them, but you have not become them. So when you reach the 96th level, you have overcome all of these dualistic illusions. And now you can start expressing your Christhood. But of course, at the 96th level, you don't have the highest level of Christhood. So there are levels of Christhood, levels of Christ discernment. But so when you climb towards the 144th level, you are letting go of these illusions that make it seem real that you are this person, that you are a physical body, you are your emotions, you are your thoughts, and the earth is a real world. You're letting go of these illusions. But as you reach those higher levels, it is part of Christhood that you express your level of consciousness, your insights, your understanding to help others. Because as we have said before, Christhood that is not expressed in helping others is not Christhood. And how do you express yourself? How do you even speak words? You have to have some structures in the mind, some kind of personality. Otherwise, how would you express yourself and how would other people relate to you? So you see, there is a distinction to be made between the illusions that allow you to descend and then just the outer personality, we might say, that you use to express yourself in this world. The difference is that as you rise towards the 144th level of consciousness, you are letting go of the illusions that cause you to identify yourself with, identify yourself as this outer personality. You don't have to overcome the outer personality. The Buddha still had an individual personality. I still had an individual personality. Other masters have had the same. You are just not identified with it. Now, this, my beloved, is not an easy process. I do not recall us ever promising that the spiritual path would be easy, that the path to the ascension would be easy. And why isn't it easy? Because the mind, the conceptual mind, the linear mind, will attempt to stop or hinder or delay your progress towards Christhood. Now, this is probably somewhat easy to understand when we are talking about the separate mind, the dualistic mind. The dualistic mind is very, very selfish, self-centered, self-focused. You look at people with the lowest level of consciousness on earth, they have no empathy, as it is normally said about narcissists. They do not consider the suffering of other people. They only consider themselves and their own goals. So it's easy enough to see that this separate mind, this selfish mind, the egotistical mind can hinder your progress, will hinder your progress. The ego will try to keep you trapped in the focus on self. But when you go beyond the 96th level, you have risen above this. But there is still a mind that will attempt to delay your progress, divert your attention into blind alleys. And this is a mind that is more difficult to uncover. It is more difficult to see through, and many people have actually become stuck in this mind for lifetimes, dealing with this mind. And it is truly an enigma. Some will call it a contradiction. And I am not attempting to explain it in full in one dictation. I am not expecting that you will grasp this in full by hearing just this one dictation. But we have to start somewhere. And so, what have we said? What have I said in this dictation? What have we said in many other dictations? How do you create anything? How do you co-create anything? Again, take Alpha and Omega. Alpha and Omega are very creative beings, beyond what you can even imagine as creativity on Earth. And how do you create? How do you co-create something? As an individual being, even at the highest level of consciousness, how do you co-create? You formulate an image in your mind of the form you want to co-create. How do you formulate an image? Well, through what you, at least on Earth, would call a concept. You form a concept in your mind. And you, as we have described it before, then use the powers of your mind to project that concept, that mental image, upon the matter light, which then takes on the form. First at the identity level, then at the mental, then at the emotional, then at the physical, if you are in this unascended sphere. In the spiritual realm, it is different because you manifest directly and immediately. So you are formulating a concept in order to create any form. In other words, any form that ever existed is based on a concept formulated in the minds of some beings. And they use the Christ consciousness to formulate the concept. Meaning that the Christ consciousness is embedded in the concept. And when the concept manifests as a form, the Christ consciousness is embedded in the form. It is, we might say, imprisoned in the form. An aspect of the universal Christ consciousness. So you see, in the spiritual realm, beings are conceptualizing in order to co-create. How is that different from what you are doing in an unascended sphere? In principle, it isn't different. But in practicality, it is fundamentally different. You see, in an unascended sphere, you do not have the ascended level of consciousness. Therefore, you do not really see yourself as a co-creator. You can come to understand that you are a co-creator. You can even come to experience it when you experience the conscious you as pure awareness, because you realize that you cannot exist on your own. Nevertheless, when you take on the illusion at the 144th level and keep going down to the 48th level, you are doing this by coming to accept these concepts. This is how the world works. And you are creating your own version of these general concepts. And you are conceptualizing. And as you are doing this, you are also creating the mind that conceptualizes within the framework of this unascended sphere, specifically a planet like Earth. So there is a certain range of illusions from the 144th to the 48th level here on Earth that are specific to Earth. And in order to take on these illusions, you are creating the conceptual mind. And in order to fully grasp this, you have to realize that even though we have talked to you about these levels of the mind, the conceptual mind is actually beyond the mental mind. The mental mind is a level of thought specifically focused on how you can do things in the physical world. But the conceptual mind is beyond it. The conceptual mind is also in your identity body. It's what you use to create your sense of identity. You use it to create your thoughts, your thinking structures, and you use it to create your emotional patterns. You even use it to create part of your physical body. So the conceptual mind is more than the four levels of the mind. It is really what creates the four levels of the mind. And so you can talk about ego in its lowest form, which is below the 48th level of consciousness, the self-centered, selfish ego. But you can also say that the conceptual mind is the ego between the 48th and the 144th level. Specifically between the 96th and the 144th. That is the higher level of the ego that allows you, the conscious you, to experience the world as real, experience the body as real, the emotions, the thoughts, and the identity as real. So you see that as you rise from the 96th level towards the 144th, you are beginning to realize that you are more, first of all, than the physical body, the emotions, the thoughts, and the sense of identity. But there comes a point where you also have to start realizing that you are more than this conceptual mind. And that everything held by the conceptual mind is actually an illusion. And it's something that you have to question and let go of. And a conceptual mind will resist this because the conceptual mind will say, but this is not an illusion, this is real. And even when you have these concepts that we have given you of the Christ and the Christ mind, the conceptual mind will take this, and it can take what I have said in this dictation, and it can say, but look, Jesus said that every form that was ever created was created out of the Christ mind. So this image that you are dealing with right now and that you are starting to question, it was created out of the Christ mind. How can it be wrong? Therefore, you should not question it. You should accept it. Accept that this is Christhood. This is Christ's discernment for you. And this is what makes it possible that there are people who can attain a certain level of Christ's discernment. But now they come to a specific idea about the world, about themselves, that they are not willing to give up. They are not willing to question it. And now they say, but this is an expression of the Christ mind. And therefore, it's an absolute truth. And therefore, I don't need to question it, and I don't need to look beyond it. And you can do this at the 48th level, at the 64th level, at the 96th level, at the 124th level, even at the 144th level. You can allow the conceptual mind to say, no, this you should not question, for this is the Christ truth. But what have I said throughout this dictation that the Christ is? It's more than any form, any concept. How do you rise from the 48th to the 49th level? By realizing there is more than the worldview you have at the 48th level. So how do you rise from the 143rd to the 144th? By realizing there is more than when you have even at the 143rd level. How do you qualify for your ascension? By realizing there's more than even what you see at the 144th level. So this is Christ. Yes, every concept is out of the Christ consciousness. You cannot formulate a concept without the Christ consciousness. But the Christ consciousness didn't become the concept. So there is always more to Christ than the concept. And the conscious you formulated the concept, but has not become the concept. So there's always more to you than the concept. And when you acknowledge that, when you experience that, you are experiencing Christ. That you are Christ, because you are out of Christ. And you are experiencing that there is more. Because when you reach a certain level of consciousness, a certain level of willingness to question even your deepest identity here on earth, you begin to experience that there's more, which is the I am presence. And therefore, you are first connected with the I am presence, then gradually you even let go of the sense of distance. So you can say, I am presence. And you can experience I am presence. And that's when you are the living Christ in embodiment. But as long as you have a concept that you are not willing to question and look beyond, you are not the living Christ in embodiment. You may think you are the living Christ. You may declare you are the living Christ. You may think you have some ultimate Christ discernment, but you are not. Because you don't acknowledge that there is more. More to you, more to your sense of identity, more to any thoughts, any ideas you believe in, more to any feelings. If you don't acknowledge there's more, you are not the living Christ, no matter what you think you are. You may have, and this is what the conceptual mind will do as you rise higher, you may have created a concept of what it means to be the living Christ. But no concept can define the living Christ. What I have attempted to do here is set before you life and death. In a nutshell, in a very concentrated form, I have given you the basic dynamic of the world of form, of the raising of consciousness. Surely there's more than can be said. Surely there's more than will be said. But if you would take this one dictation, read it, study it, contemplate it, allow it to transform your consciousness, this one dictation could qualify you for your ascension. If you really grasp what has been said here. And that's why, in a way, I have set before you life and death. And therefore, I can say, choose life. There is always more. Christ cannot be defined by any form in this unascended sphere, especially not on an unnatural planet like Earth. We can give you words that point to, but unless you go beyond the words, you will not experience Christ. And if you do not experience Christ, you cannot be the living Christ. But what did I say? The conscious you may have identified itself with the ego. It has not become the ego. It has not become a fundamentally different being. It has just stepped into a perception filter, and it's experiencing life and experiencing itself through that filter, because it is looking out through the filter. But the conscious you can at any time make the choice to reverse its sense of direction and look in. And if you go through this simple meditation that I gave in the beginning, you can look in and see, I'm not the physical body. I'm not these emotional patterns. I'm not these thought patterns and beliefs and ideas. I'm not this sense of identity. I am more. And that experience is the only way to be free of the sense of identity you have on earth. And the only way to have that experience is through Christ, the Christ consciousness. That is why Christ is the Redeemer. That is why no one will be saved without Christ as that universal consciousness. But how is that universal consciousness ever going to be expressed in the world of form? As I said, the universal consciousness cannot create anything out of itself, only through individual beings. So, how can you experience the universal Christ consciousness on earth? Well, you cannot, but you can experience the individualized Christ consciousness because a specific being has attained the Christ consciousness and chosen to remain with earth and express itself here. This can be beings in embodiment, and there have been many over the history of this planet, or it could be ascended beings expressing themselves through beings in embodiment. And of course, the beings in embodiment who have been the living Christ realize that they are not the living Christ of their own effort. I can of my own self do nothing. They realize it is only because a being at a higher level, an ascended being, is flowing through them. My Father worketh hitherto, and I work. So you see what Christ is. Christ, as it has any meaning on earth, is not the universal Christ mind, the unexpressed, the undifferentiated. It is there, correct, but you are not going to experience it on earth. In fact, you are never going to experience it anywhere. Because what have I said? Alpha and Omega, you can say in a sense that they have the highest level of Christ consciousness of any beings in the world of form, but it's still individualized. So as you go up to higher and higher levels of consciousness, you are raising your consciousness to where you can now experience the next level up. And this continues until you reach the level of Alpha and Omega. Then you experience the highest level of Christ consciousness in this world of form. And when you go beyond that, you experience the Christ consciousness of the Creator. So this entire concept of this undifferentiated consciousness, it's not that it's wrong. The Brahman as the undifferentiated consciousness, it's not that it's wrong, it's not that it doesn't exist, it's just that it doesn't have any practical implication, because nobody has ever experienced it, and nobody ever will experience it, no matter what they believe, no matter what they claim, that they have attained God realization or enlightenment or this or that. You can only experience the Christ consciousness in an individual form, and you as a being, an embodiment on earth, can only experience the Christ consciousness from the ascended masters who are working with earth, who are the closest representatives of the Christ consciousness that you can experience on this planet. It doesn't matter what anybody claims. No being on earth has ever experienced Brahman or infinite awareness or Christ, the universal Christ consciousness. You can only experience the hierarchy of Christed beings reaching to the Creator. This, of course, is another topic that we will discourse on at a later time. For now, I know I have gone beyond what you can handle in one sitting, so I will seal you in the joy of my heart, and both Maitreya and I will give you more teachings. But I wanted to give you a very challenging discourse at the beginning, because it can help you, if you are willing, open your minds, start to question this conceptual mind. For what is the conceptual mind? Well, it can be called many things. But you look at the situation described in Matthew, where Peter contradicts what I'm saying will happen to me, and says, "Be it far from thee, Lord." And what is my response? As you know, get thee behind me, Satan, because it was the conceptual mind of Peter that made him think that even though he had recognized that there was something special about me, that I had a higher level of consciousness than he did, he still thought that his conceptual mind could tell what the Christ is. And that right there is the major problem that prevents the liberation of Christ. That very tendency to use the conceptual mind to form a concept of what Christ is, and then wanting to elevate that concept to not being a concept, but being some absolute reality. This is how the world is. But what have I said previously? Every form started with a concept. Is there anything that is not a concept? Nay. Therefore, is there anything that is ultimately real? Nay. Does that mean everything is an illusion? Nay. For there are concepts that are based on the realization of what the Christ mind is. And there are concepts that spring from separation. But that is what we will return to in the coming discourses. So I seal you in this joy flame that I am, and contrast it with how most Christians celebrate Easter. They focus on these images, on the suffering Christ on the cross. Where is the joy in that? Where is the joy in their hearts? But I was only on the cross for a short time. And the real joy of Easter is, of course, that I transcended the cross, as the Christ will always do. And in that transcendence of the conceptual limitations, in that is real joy. Be sealed in that joy.